Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really getting into a foundational concept in sociology, positivism.
That's right.
Think about how scientists study, say, physics or chemistry. They look for hard facts, things they can measure, laws they can observe.
Hmm.
Positivism is basically trying to do that, but with the social world, using data to understand why people do what they do.
Exactly. And for you sociology students listening, this is really fundamental.
Mm.
Positivism says, look, we can study society objectively, like the natural sciences.
So focusing on what you can actually see and count.
Pretty much. Observable facts, quantitative data. The goal is to spot patterns, maybe even figure out cause and effect, rather than getting bogged down in, subjective feelings or interpretations.
And that naturally leads to a preference for quantitative methods, right? Numbers, stats, large groups.
Absolutely. Positivists value that kind of data because it feels objective. It allows for statistical analysis, finding correlations, maybe generalizing findings to a wider population. It helps build that scientific case.
And understanding these methods, why positivists use them, what their strengths and weaknesses are, that's crucial for you as students. It helps you critique research, maybe even design your own studies down the line.
It really does. It gives you the tools for systematic investigation. So today, we're planning to break down some of the main quantitative tools positivists use.
Like what?
Well, things like laboratory experiments, field experiments, those surveys or questionnaires everyone's filled out, structured interviews, and using official statistics.
Okay, great. Let's start with lab experiments then. The classic image, maybe. White coats, controlled setting.
Sort of, yeah. It's about creating an artificial environment where the researcher can control things very tightly. You manipulate one thing, an independent variable.
Like maybe how much praise you give a student.
And then you measure the effect on something else, the dependent variable.
Like their test performance.
Exactly. We're trying to isolate that specific cause and effect link.
And the big plus for positivists.
High reliability. Because it's so controlled and standardized, someone else should, in theory, be able to repeat the exact same experiment and get similar results. That repeatability is key. Plus, that tight control really helps pin down cause and effect.
But, and this is a big but for sociology students, right? How real is it? Does behavior in a lab actually reflect life outside?
That's the major criticism, the artificiality. People might act differently just because they're in this weird controlled situation. It potentially lacks ecological validity.
And you've also got the Hawthorne effect you mentioned earlier.
Just knowing you're part of an experiment can make you change how you act, which obviously messes with the results.
Cave plus ethical issues can crop up: informed consent, maybe deception if you can't tell people the full aim.
And they tend to be small scale too. You can't easily run a lab experiment with thousands of people, so are the findings truly representative of the wider population. It's tough to control for all the messy complexities of real social life in a lab.
Okay, so if the lab is too artificial, what about field experiments? Taking the experiment out into the real world.
Precisely. You're still manipulating something, potentially, but it's happening in a natural setting, a school, a workplace, a neighborhood, and often the people involved might not even know they're part of a study.
So that tackles the artificiality problem. You get more natural behavior.
Definitely. That's the big advantage, higher ecological validity.
Yeah.
You're seeing how things play out in a real context. Positivists appreciate that it gets closer to actual social processes.
But I guess you lose some control.
You do. That's the trade-off. In the real world, all sorts of other things are happening that you can't control. So it becomes harder to be absolutely certain that the thing you changed is the cause of the outcome you observed. Reliability can take a hit.
And the ethics seem even trickier if people don't know they're being studied. Lack of informed consent is a big one.
A very big one. Plus, practically speaking, you just can't use field experiments for every kind of sociological question. Sometimes it's just not feasible or ethical to manipulate situations in that way.
Right. Okay, let's shift gears to something probably more familiar to everyone. Questionnaires. Sending out surveys, basically.
Yep. Standardized set of written questions given to a sample of people. Think of those big national surveys on attitudes or lifestyles.
And the appeal for positivists here is practicality.
Huge practicality. Relatively cheap. You could potentially reach thousands of people quickly. If you get a good representative sample, you can generalize the findings.
Makes sense. And because everyone gets the same questions, the data is standardized, which means it's reliable. You can compare answers easily.
Exactly. It fits that positivist need for objective, comparable data. And ethically, they're often seen as less problematic, usually anonymous, voluntary participation.
But we've all ignored a survey or two, haven't we? Response rates can be an issue.
Definitely. Especially with postal ones. If only certain types of people bother to reply, your sample isn't representative anymore, is it? That introduces bias.
And validity, can you trust the answers? People might misunderstand the question or maybe not answer entirely honestly.
Right. Social desirability bias can creep in, and there's no chance to ask follow-up questions, to clarify, to get more depth. It can be quite superficial.
Okay, so what about structured interviews? It sounds like a questionnaire read aloud.
In a way, yes. It's an interviewer asking a preset list of questions, usually closed-ended, face-to-face, or maybe over the phone. The key is that standardization, every respondent gets asked the exact same thing in the same order.
So it keeps that reliability advantage of questionnaires.
It does. Standardized questions mean comparable answers, which is great for quantitative analysis. Plus, having an interviewer there might boost response rates compared to just mailing out a form. You can potentially reach a wide sample, too.
But the interviewer being there could also be a downside.
Potentially, yes. The interviewer effect. People might give answers they think the interviewer wants to hear, or answers that make them look good, that social desirability thing again. Validity can suffer.
And it's still quite rigid, isn't it? If someone gives an interesting answer, you can't really probe deeper or ask follow-up questions that weren't on the script.
No, that's the trade-off for standardization. You lose flexibility, so you might miss out on valuable insights or nuances.
All right, one more method. Official statistics. This is data the government or other big organizations collect, right? Like the census, crime figures, unemployment rates.
Exactly. Huge data sets, often collected regularly over long periods.
And for positivists, this must seem like gold dust.
Well, in some ways.
Mhm.
It's incredibly practical. The data already exists. It's often free or cheap to access, and it covers massive populations, sometimes the entire country. So high representativeness.
You can compare trends over time or between different regions.
Yes, fantastic for comparative analysis. And you can sometimes look for correlations between different sets of statistics, like Durkheim famously did with suicide rates and social factors, to explore potential cause and effect links.
But as sociology students, you always need to be critical about where data comes from. These stats weren't collected for sociologists, were they?
Precisely. They were collected for government administrative purposes, usually. So the definitions use what counts as crime or unemployment might not match sociological concepts. That impacts reliability and validity from a research perspective.
The state's definition might be different from a sociologist's definition.
Completely. And governments might change definitions over time, making comparisons difficult. Plus, think about crime statistics. They only record reported crime. What about the dark figure of unreported or unrecorded crime?
Yeah, that means the official stats might not be giving us the full picture. Validity issues again.
Definitely. So, while incredibly useful, you have to handle official statistics with care and awareness of their limitations.
Okay, so we've covered quite a few methods. If we zoom out and look at the whole positivist approach using these quantitative tools, what are the big takeaways, the strengths?
Well, its big claim is making sociology more scientific, more objective. It's really good at identifying broad patterns, social trends, correlations across large populations. That kind of large-scale generalizable data can be really powerful.
And potentially useful for policymakers.
Yes, absolutely. Governments often rely on this kind of statistical data to inform social policy decisions.
But then there are the criticisms we've touched on.
Indeed, and for you as students, this is where understanding different sociological perspectives comes in. Interpretivists, for example, would argue that focusing just on numbers misses the whole point of human action, the meanings, the interpretations, the why behind the what.
That reducing complex social interactions to statistics is just too simplistic.
That's the argument, that it ignores subjective experience and can strip away context. And as we saw, even quantitative data isn't perfectly objective. Issues of validity, reliability, bias can creep into any method, even official statistics.
So it's about recognizing that positivism offers one particular way of seeing the social world, a valuable one, especially for certain kinds of questions, but not the only way.
Exactly. Understanding these quantitative methods, their strengths, their weaknesses, the assumptions behind them, that's absolutely crucial for you as sociology students. It helps you evaluate the research you read, the statistics you see in the news.
And think critically about how we even know what we claim to know about society.
Perfectly put. Which leads us to a final thought for you to chew on.
Go on.
Thinking about everything we've discussed, the control of lab experiments versus the realism of field experiments, the reach of questionnaires, versus the potential bias in official stats, where do you think these positivist quantitative methods are most useful in sociology today? What kinds of social questions are they best equipped to answer? And perhaps just as importantly, where do their limitations mean we really need other approaches, maybe more qualitative ones, to get a fuller understanding? Something to reflect on as you continue your studies.